All right, let's get started.
All right. Hello, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for our fourth installment of this Real Talk series. So before we get started, I'm going to ask if anybody's comfortable with being called on to provide answers and to participate in practice conversations tonight. So if you are, go ahead and message us in the chat box and we will remember that. And don't worry, it's not going to be anything too hard or challenging. And if you feel like you need help being walked through that, we'll also do that too. So if anybody is into being a volunteer, go ahead and hit us up in the group chat. And don't worry, only me and Dion will be able to see that. All right, so like I said, welcome to Real Talk, a series creating healthy conversations with young people for young people. This fourth installation is gender and sexuality. So we have a couple of Zoom guidelines. You guys might be pros by now, but just so you know, we're going to be keeping the microphone and video muted when people aren't speaking. But if you do have questions or comments, go ahead and feel free to type into that chat box again and to talk directly to us. We have two sections. We're going to stop and take questions towards the middle and the end. So feel free when it arises. There are no silly questions. We'd love to hear from you. I am Patience Roundtree. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Upstate Illinois. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I have been working in social justice with the LGBTQAI community since I was in youth. So I'm coming up on 20 years now. And also on the phone, we have Dion. Dion, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dion Strathman. I am the Director of Community Engagement and Adolescent Health Initiatives here at Planned Parenthood of Illinois. I use all pronouns, and I have been working in social justice for gender and sexuality, honestly, since college, which was a very long time ago. It was about 20 years ago. So today we're going to cover a variety of topics. First, we're going to define some foundational aspects of gender and sexuality. We're going to explore ways to support LGBTQIA youth. And that is really our biggest takeaway, is that it's really important to be able to support LGBTQIA youth as they're developing their own identity. And we're also going to be practicing ways to advocate for LGBTQIA youth, and what's the difference between supporting and advocating for someone. As Patience mentioned, this is the fourth in our series. So we do have 3 more, and next week we'll be covering how to talk to young people about birth control, and it will be next week, same time, same place. If you're not able to make it, we will have these, we will make these videos available online at our YouTube channel, Planned Parenthood of Illinois. And at the end of this session, we'll also put up a link and a QR code for anyone who hasn't already registered for the next session. And then just a few workshop rules, some ground rules. First of all, take care of yourself. We're all adults here, and we trust that you know what's best for your body. Be open to new ideas, be open to new terminology, and ask questions. As Patience just said, if you have any questions, go ahead and chat them into the messenger, and it'll go straight to the host. And we have times in the presentation that are designated to answering those questions. And both Patience and I will also stay after at the end of the presentation to answer some questions. This is a no judgment zone, so we always assume best intentions. If anyone does say anything that could be at all offensive, we will kind of work through that in terms of like their comment or the question and work through what might be offensive about it. And then last thing, take notes. Take notes about new information, take notes about things you want to look up later, and take notes about your feelings, how you feel about the topics that we're talking about today.
So before we dive in, let's do a quick exercise. I don't know how many people know about Reddit, but Reddit is a forum where people can post and talk about topics. One of the popular forum topics is, am I the a-hole? So I'm going to share one particular story about a couple who decided to announce their pregnancy with a gender reveal party. So here we go. So a couple is having their second child. The first child's a girl. It's the day of the party, the moment the truth comes, and the sparklers are lit, and it reveals pink. It's a girl. So the husband was hoping baby two would be a boy, so they'd be able to do things like play with balls or coach him with his little league team. So instead of being happy, he stormed out of the party. So now that we know these details, we're going to ask everyone to take a quick poll.
So you
All
are.
right. So you should be seeing a poll on your screen. So do you think in this scenario, the father was an a-hole for leaving the party angry? We got a few options on the screen. It could be no, his response was understandable. Yes, his response was childish. Yes, he could always play catch and camp with his daughters. Yes, there's no guarantee his son would even like sports. And doesn't sperm decide sex? So we're gonna give everybody some time to get it in. We're got like halfway right now, so probably about a minute or two.
Oh, they're really coming in now.
Yeah, it's exciting seeing a bunch of people.
Yeah, I like seeing the like rates change. They're like racing each other.
All right. So since I can see how many people are voting, I'm just gonna give it a few more seconds so that everybody can get their vote in. Some Jeopardy theme music for you guys. So right now, what's in the lead for the response is yes. His response was childish. Leading that, so the second one would be yes. There's no guarantee his son would even like sports. And following that is yes, he could always play catch with his daughters. And you guys knocked it out of the park. These are all great answers. He doesn't know if his daughter will like to play catch, and he also doesn't know if his son would like to play catch. So there's a few situations that can be applied to this, and hopefully you will learn a few more as we go through this to learn about gender biases and how we kind of put those on our children sometimes.
All right. So just like the father in the story, a lot of people do really have some very narrow views of gender and the norms associated with that gender, or even roles associated with gender. We live in a very gendered society. We live in a society where when you're complimenting a little kid, little girls are told they're pretty, little boys are told they're strong. When a little girl speaks up, she's bossy. But when a little boy speaks up, he's a leader. When a little girl's talking about her feelings, she's emotional. While when a little boy shows feelings, it's actually wrong to show feelings for little boys unless it's anger or some other negative type of emotions. Anything else is considered girly. Our toys are very gendered, dolls versus trucks. If you've ever been to a kid's birthday party, the decorations are very, very gendered. Even with that party, you have a very gender reveal party, right? Like a lot of those parties are very pink and blue, or for a little boy's party, like a big Spider-Man theme. And as kids grow up more, they just receive more and more gendered messages. Makeup, who's allowed to wear makeup, who's allowed to do contact sports. Our messages about sex are very gendered, and even messages that we give about careers, what are possible careers for little kids, are often very gendered.
So heteronormative. Heteronormative is defining normal as being straight or cisgender. And for the USA, the norm is white, male, straight, and cisgender. So anything outside of those norms require a qualifier. For example, when you say things like doctor, pilot, actress, and teacher, instead you say something like a woman doctor, or a black pilot, or a trans actor, or my gay teacher. And in a heteronormative society, being straight is assumed. So straight people don't have to come out. Even children are assumed to be straight. You say things like, is that your girlfriend? Or, oh, is that your boyfriend? People who don't conform to gender norms are labeled gay, and gay as in actually homosexual, also gay colloquially is just other, as it not being okay. So gender is policed. Even as an adult, I still face gender being policed. Like, depending on the people who I hang out with, if I wear masculine clothes and those people are used to me wearing feminine clothes, or vice versa, I usually get something. Or because I'm a tall, slender woman, when I pick up stuff, people are like, "Oh, wow, let me help you with that. Are you okay?" And I'm always, I'm always pretty shocked because my muscles work. But so we all are still facing these gender policing that's happening. And also, just like going back to the gender reveal party, people are gendered even before they're born.
So in our heteronormative society, there are so many norms, there are so many roles, and anyone who doesn't fit into these norms can feel a lot of negative effects. They can feel like they're abnormal. They can feel like there's something wrong with them. And honestly, these negative effects can be felt by anyone. So we should be talking about gendered messaging and messages around sexuality to everyone in our lives, but especially for LGBTQIA youth. And that stands for, I know we've said this a few times, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual youth. So anyone that falls within this umbrella of gender and sexuality that fall outside of like the heteronormative norm, facing these kind of like negative effects, feeling abnormal, they tend to have higher rates of depression and suicide. They receive higher rates of bullying at school and online, oftentimes with no one interfering, even if a teacher is in the room. Because of that, we see higher rates of dropouts for queer youth. And this also leads to higher rates of unemployment and higher rates of poverty as adults. So all of this means we really need to support LGBTQIA youth.
Yeah. And as young people get older, different conversations will happen. So youth will begin to label themselves while developing their identities. And terminology is important, but don't overwhelm yourself with it. You don't have to be an expert, which is an important thing to keep telling yourself when faced with all this new information. And it's okay to take your child's lead in that conversation when you're having them. So while you may not be able to help with knowledge in that moment, you always have the ability to lead with acceptance and respect, because we're always learning and growing every step of our life. And if there's anything you could take away from tonight, it's support youth and advocate for them. So as we move through this workshop, we're going to be examining the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality, and explore ways to support youth as they develop their own identities.
So first, we're going to cover some foundational information about gender and sexuality. Again, you do not have to be an expert on any of this terminology, but we do want to begin with some basic definitions for words that we will be using throughout the workshop. And one of the things that we really hear often just used interchangeably is sex and gender. And these are two very different concepts. So sex is something that is more biological, while gender is more cultural. So when a baby is born, the midwife, the doctor, whoever is, overseeing the birth, normally looks at the baby and very quickly, just by glancing at their visible genitalia, they assign that baby a sex. And that sex is normally binary, male or female, just based on what is visible, and that is marked on their birth certificate, and they have that for, in most states, the rest of their lives. When we say usually binary, there are other instances where someone might be identified as intersex, and intersex has a very wide definition, but one of the ways I can identify intersex or define intersex is if a baby has genitalia that is ambiguous, so it doesn't fall exactly into those narrow definitions of male or female. That child may be identified as intersex. But of course, there's a whole host of other things that might identify someone as intersex. And intersex is not rare. It is incredibly common. Being intersex is actually as common as having red hair. Gender, on the other hand, is something that's developed over time. It's a part of someone's identity that they are growing into. It's their relationship between masculinity and femininity. So if we think about this like line with one on each end, we have like this hyper feminine Disney princess, right? And on the other end, we have this hyper masculine, like Rambo figure. If we were to put a dot right in the middle, that would be androgyny. So that would be someone who is neither masculine or feminine. And gender is really our relationship to where we identify along that line. And our gender is expressed through many different things. It's expressed by our clothes. It's expressed by the color of our clothes, by our language, our body language. It's expressed by the way we sit, the way we speak, and even our appearance, like our haircuts. And then we're going to get into the last two in the next couple of slides, but gender is also on a spectrum. Just like I said on that line with femininity and masculinity, there's a ton of things in between that. And then we'll also get into what is the difference between cisgender versus transgender. So oftentimes when people think about gender, they think about it in a very binary way. They think male and female, when really there is a whole host of gender identities that are on a full spectrum. Of course, people can and do identify as male and female. Some people identify as agender, meaning that they don't identify with the gender at all. Some people identify as bigender, meaning they might identify both as male and female. Some people identify as gender fluid, meaning that they move through masculinity and femininity, and they could be anywhere on that spectrum at any time. And there's a whole host of terminology that we could throw into this slide, because it's just this wonderful rainbow of possibilities, right? And Gen Z has really changed the way we talk about gender and has really added to that language, which is really amazing. So cisgender and transgender is really someone's gender identity as related to their sex assigned at birth. So a cisgender person is a person whose gender identity aligns with that sex assigned at birth. For example, a cis woman was assigned female at birth, and they identify as a woman. While a transgender person is a person whose gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth. So a trans woman is someone who was assigned male at birth, but identifies as a woman. So this is a good time for us to kind of stop and check for any questions. If you have anything right now, you can throw it into the chat. Patients, do you have any questions yet?
No questions yet, but I am monitoring.
Okay, wonderful.
And don't be shy, guys.
Yeah, and I know that was a lot of information at once. So, you know, if you're kind of processing it, just throw it into the chat whenever you want.
Oh. Okay. So I will stop monitoring the chat and get back to you guys. All right, so Dion just examined how sex and gender work together. So let's go over how gender versus sexuality plays out. So we've already talked about what gender is. We've talked about how someone expresses their gender is expression of gender identity. Those gender roles and those gender norms, like men working, women doing the housework, or even as simple as blue is boy, girl is pink. And you're going to hear this word probably pretty repetitiously tonight, but gender is on a spectrum. So people sometimes confuse sexuality with gender. So sexuality includes romantic feelings, as well as sexual attraction or the lack thereof. So sexual orientation does not always mean sexual attraction or the need for physicality. There are also gender-oriented labels that are associated with those, like when we say things like lesbian or gay. And also, to wrap back up, gender and sexuality are both on a spectrum. So this slide may look familiar. We went over it with the binary way people think of gender versus the reality of it being a spectrum. So we're going to do the same thing with sexuality. And people tend to mentally label sexuality within a binary as well. So for example, straight versus gay or straight versus lesbian. But I'm here personally to tell you that gender, like sexuality, isn't binary. It's also important to note the fluidity of it and that sexuality can change over the course of somebody's life. Um, it's a spectrum instead of a mutual exclusive category. So it's important to support youth as they navigate forming those identities because they may change.
So we've talked a lot now about just kind of like foundational information, and we want to make a switch to be able to talk more about how to create safe spaces and how to, really support LGBTQIA youth. So one of the things that is a very easy way to just create that foundation of support is just asking pronouns. So I know this is new for some people. As you saw in the beginning, when Patience and I introduced ourselves, we said the pronouns that we identify with. And it is a really great way to really show respect and to show to show support. And this is for all people. This is not just for young people. This is not just for queer people. This is something that shows support and respect for all people. But it is critical for transgender individuals for people to use the correct pronouns. Using the correct pronouns with transgender individuals shows that you support their identity and that you respect their identity. Using the wrong pronouns with a trans person is not only offensive, but it could actually create a unsafe environment for them. It could out them as transgender, and they might be in a place where it is very dangerous for people to know that they are trans. So it's really important to always use pronouns, or always use the correct pronouns, and think about it that way. Just a really, really easy way to show support. And that includes non-binary pronouns. So I know a lot of people have trouble with pronouns like they and them. I hear from a lot of people who are like, I just have so much trouble with they in the singular. And they in the singular is something that is just a normal part of our language already. If I go to the doctor and I tell my friend, like, oh, I went to the doctor yesterday, my friend's response might be, well, what did they say? Because they don't know the gender of my doctor. That is a normal thing that we say. We have been using they in the singular for a very long time. So this isn't incorrect in terms of grammar, but it can cause people discomfort. But if you practice using non-binary pronouns, if you practice using they and them, especially when you don't know someone's gender or don't know the pronouns they use, you will get more comfortable with them. Also, just getting into the habit of saying your pronouns when you introduce yourself. And it's a good way to say that you're not going to assume the other person's gender identity. And it sets a model for them to also say their pronouns as they introduce themselves. And it's really important if they haven't offered their pronouns, that you always offer your pronouns before asking theirs. And if you're in a group of people, it's really important that if you're ever asking someone's pronouns in a group, you're asking everybody in the group and not singling out someone who looks androgynous. You're not really sure if they have are they masculine, are they feminine? I don't really know which pronouns to use. Just make sure you're asking everyone, because that is just a big way of creating that safe environment that I just talked about and creating those safe spaces. Especially for youth, we need to create safe spaces where youth are free to develop their own identity. And we need to be able to support changes. Sometimes people, as they're developing their identity, as they're learning more about themselves, their identities, their labels start changing, and that's great, and that's fine. That doesn't mean that they don't know who they are. It's just that they're learning more about themselves, and we need to support that. Someone might also be confused about what label to use. It's not so much that they're confused about their identity. It's not so much that they're confused about whether they're gay or whether they're trans. They're too young to know that. But sometimes people just don't have the words to be able to describe things. And we need to validate that confusion and say, I understand that. I've been there before. I know what it's like to not really have those words, and that it's okay. We'll work through that. And celebrate diversity. It is awesome that you have this very different identity, and I want to celebrate it with you and want to empower you. And just like Patience said, these words keep coming up, but gender and sexuality are on a spectrum. So we don't want to make assumptions about our young people that they are binary, whether it is gender or sexuality. We're not going to make the assumption that our young person identifies as male or female or identify as gay or straight, that there's a whole spectrum for them to identify in. And then again, just avoid getting tripped up with that terminology. You don't need to be an expert. You do not have to have a PhD in gender studies. What young people are looking for is interest and support. And then finally, really separating our expectations from reality, being able to say that young people are their own individuals. So if we think back to that first story where the guy's like, I'm so mad, I wanted a son because I wanted to go camping, I wanted to play sports with him. As many of you put in your survey, he could easily have a son that doesn't like anything like that doesn't like sports, that doesn't like camping. And that is okay, that's great, right? But he needs to separate his expectations from that human being that his son is.
Agreed. So here are some ways that we're going to examine some gendered messages. So prompt a conversation with youth about gender and sexuality and avoid putting them into a gender bias when you're having that conversation. Allow them the freedom to choose their own interests, their hobbies, areas of study, even if you think that that goes against the youth's perceived gender. So also a good rule of thumb if there are siblings in the house is to be careful of those double standards. If they have a sibling of another gender, give them the same rules and then hold them to the same expectations and accountabilities. And then when you have those discussions about talking, don't use phrases like be a man or man up or act like a lady. Use words that you really mean. Be articulate, say things like be brave, be mature, or be polite. And then also have discussions about gender biases in the media. So whether you're watching TV or movies, or you're reading a magazine or seeing a book, have conversations with the youths or your preteens about what they think about these stereotypes, how to dismantle them, and how they're kind of really harmful for everybody. That includes people who are cisgender or who aren't cisgendered. And also just always empower your youth and be aware of the biases so that they can combat them when you're not with them and you're not navigating them with them. It's always great practice. It's great practice for you, and it's great practice for the youth. So since we've walked through that, now we're going to have some exercises. We spoke about volunteers earlier. We have a couple, but if anybody would also like to raise their hand right now in the chat, we will also have a couple later that you can be a part of. But for this one, we're going to head and how about MJ? So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Give me 1 second to find you, MJ. Mm-hmm. Oh, there you are. All right, MJ,
Hey.
you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, MJ, thanks for doing an example with us. So example 1 is going to be your 5-year-old child tells you that a boy at their school has started wearing dresses. She says she's confused because aren't dresses for girls? How do you think that you would approach that?
Well, I would probably start the conversation talking about that anyone is allowed to wear whatever they want, and that doesn't necessarily, the clothing that they choose doesn't necessarily determine the gender that they identify with, and that everybody should be accepting and loving.
Yeah, that's a great way to approach it. To let them know that while it is a gender norm, but it's also, we have the ability to wear whatever we choose to, whatever makes us feel comfortable. So yeah, I think that was a really great answer. And then we're going to do example 2. So if you don't mind also working with me for that one. So
Sure.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be you and your teen are walking down the street when you see a lesbian couple. The teen laughs and says, I wonder which one's the man.
Wow. Well, that would be a very stern conversation with my teen. Letting that my teen know that is not appropriate. That that again, there's a wide variety of relationships and a wide variety of people, and who are they to pass judgment on anybody, and that's not an appropriate response to seeing a couple that's in love.
Yeah, that is an amazing response. And you could also fortify that with letting them know that, like, subtly that, or overtly, that these are gender roles that they are talking about, and that we don't know if this person is a female or a male, but in the situation, they are harboring themselves some gender biases that maybe you could also work through with them and see maybe what prompted them to make the joke, if it was something that they heard, or maybe they just thought, I can't think outside the binary of what is a relationship that's heteronormative. So just kind of navigating them through that and into a state of awareness. So
Gotcha.
thank you.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
for sure. And thank you for participating, MJ. I really appreciate
Sure.
that.
Okay, so again, we really want to hit this home, this idea of creating a safe space for young people, for them to be able to explore their gender expression and to explore romantic feelings without shame. This means that we have to, as adults, look at our own ideas about gender and sexuality, and what are the biases that we hold, and what are some things that we are teaching to our or the young people in our lives that could be negative and could be seen as negative. It's really important when we're having these conversations with young people, start off with simple things. Ask your young person, what pronouns they use, and use them afterwards. It might seem really weird to ask a young person what pronouns they use, especially if you've known this young person their whole life and suddenly you're asking them, hey, what are your pronouns? But it's a really great way to be able to talk about gender and talk to them about how to support gender and respect people's gender, and to model it by showing them that I respect and support your gender, and I want to know, like, what pronouns would you like me to use when I refer to you? And that includes non-binary pronouns, being able to, again, lead into any discomfort for certain pronouns that aren't in our everyday language. And non-binary pronouns actually go beyond they and them. Sometimes people don't like pronouns at all. Some people are like, you know what, I would prefer you just use my name. And that's perfectly fine too. Say, great, I will do that. I'm going to make a genuine effort to just use your name. If I slip up, I will correct myself, and you don't have to make a big deal out of it. But correction is important, to be able to correct yourself and say the correct pronoun, and then move on. Take an interest in your young person's relationships. And that means also not assuming who they're attracted to. So if they say they have a crush on someone, they have a date coming up, there's a dance coming up, allowing them space to be able to tell you the gender of the person they like, or not tell you that. They might not feel comfortable telling you that, but the more you create that space, the more you support them, the more they're going to feel comfortable sharing that information with you. But while we're doing this, part of supporting youth is also giving them healthy boundaries. We don't want to say, I support what you do, go run wild, And I see this this conflict where people are like, I want to really support my child in their gender expression, in their sexuality, and I don't know how to say no to certain things because that might make me seem homophobic or transphobic. So explain to your child, I support your gender expression. I support your sexuality. I support you. I support whoever you are. But there are certain things that I, as a parent, or I, as a caregiver, have to say no to. And that's good because you're creating a safe space for them physically. It's a part of creating that safe space. And then also, a lot of queer youth really don't have anyone else around that they can talk to. A lot of queer youth don't have any peers. I know when I was a young kid in high school, I was desperate to just find someone that I related to. And so it's really great for, parents and caretakers to be able to help their young person find people like them, to be able to introduce them to a local youth group, or even look into their school and see if they have a GSA. So GSA stands for Gender Sexuality Alliance. It used to stand for Gay Straight Alliance, but it's a queer organization that is in a lot of school systems, and it's a good way for people to meet other people they can relate to. So now we're going to explore a couple of examples that cover that supportive language. And Paula.
We actually have somebody who's in the
Okay.
chat who has their hand up, so it's super exciting. Sorry, Paula. I felt like maybe you might have been asked. Pam K is interested, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute them. Pam, can you hear us? Awesome.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome.
Hi, Pam. So we have a couple of examples here. So the first one is you have a daughter. She's 8 years old, and she wants to wear her brother's suit to church. She says she hates dresses. How would you respond and show that child support?
Yeah, in this case, I would be super open to it, and I would be sure to normalize it. I think the reason I'm hesitating is because I wouldn't want to be, I think I would want to like not make it a huge thing. Like it's totally normal for her to want to wear a suit and to not want to wear a dress. So I think I would just be like, yeah, that's great. If you feel comfortable with that, then that's what you should wear today.
Yeah, I love that. I love normalizing that, like just making it not a big deal. Like, you know what? A lot of people don't like dresses. Suits are cool. Maybe if you like your brother's suit, maybe we can go get you your own suit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Great response. The next one's a little bit trickier. So you pick up your 15-year-old son's phone and you see a notification from Grindr. So if you're not familiar with Grindr, Grindr is an app. It is a dating app that is used mostly by male-identified people, but it has a pretty big reputation for being an app where people are hooking up. It's normally a sexual encounter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would want to be pretty straightforward. I wouldn't want to kind of like beat around the bush. I would just say like, hey, I want to be really honest with you. When I picked up your phone, I did notice a notification because I wouldn't want to make them feel trapped. Like I would just want to say like, I did notice this. And I think my main concern would be like, do you feel safe? And I guess like kind of getting the extent that he was using it for, and kind of try to open the conversation and not like give any directives, but just to say like, do you feel safe? Like, what are your rules for how you're managing it? Kind of like I would want to get a sense for how he's using it before I say, I guess, too much else.
Yeah, and then based on his response, that could lead to several other discussions, because if he hasn't thought about that, you could have the discussion, this is an app that is for people 18 and older. There could be men that are, 35 or much older than you that are messaging you on this. How is that going to be a safe interaction, and be able to talk through consent? And also, as a parent, if there's any rules that you want to put in place there also,
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And then we're going to move into advocacy.
Awesome. So while support is also very important, advocating for youth is also extremely, extremely important. So you want to validate their identities even when and if they change. And also defend young people against negative family members and friends. While they're trying to exercise their gender identities, sometimes they might receive a little bit of negative feedback from people who are around them. And when you see that or witness it, it's really important to be supportive and do that pushback with them. While they might learn mechanisms to do it themselves, it's also always nice to know you're supported by your family. So challenge gender policing as well. So how people wear their hair or advocate for how they want to represent their outer appearance. There's no reason to be policing those situations. So allow people the freedom to explore their identities in safety. And lastly, what's super important is like know what's going on in the school system and ask the school system how they intend to counsel or protect LGBTQIA youth. This does help your child, but also it facilitates everybody's like safety bubble. So taking care of your kid will also reach, what am I trying to say? So it's important that you also check out how the school system is working. And also when you do that, it helps your child and other children as well. So we're gonna do one more set of examples, which is helping child navigate gender and sexuality. If Paula is still on the line and is interested, I would like to call on you since I clearly took your turn away for Cam. Just give me 1 second to find you. Hopefully you'll be there. Let's see, Paula, there you go. Awesome.
I'm here.
Hi, Paula.
Hello.
So thank you for going over the examples with us. I'll read the first one to you. So your neighbor makes a comment about your son wearing makeup and he feels sorry for the father. What would your response be to that situation?
Well, in all honesty, my immediate response back to the neighbor would probably be, I feel sorry for you for feeling the need to make such a comment.
Mm-hmm.
If my son wants to wear makeup, then I fully support that. You know, he's expressing himself. So go back in your house, close your door, and mind your business because my son is just fine the way he is.
I like that answer. It's better than one we've ever practiced with. You affirm, you set boundaries, you let them know how to respect your family and how to speak about your child, and also you were corrective. I think that's awesome. Some people might take it a little less aggressively, but I like that mama spirit in you. So one more to go, just example 6. Your child tells you that they never use the bathroom at school and they get made fun of when they try. What would be your response for this one?
Sure. Well, I'd have a conversation with my child and I'd ask them, I try to get from them why they are not using the bathroom at school. And for me, I'd probably provide an example of when I was younger, right? And didn't do something at school because somebody had said something to me, right?
Yeah.
So then once we had that conversation and once I found out why, I would march myself right up to the school and I would demand to have a conversation. This has actually happened. Where either the teacher or the principal, depending on where it starts, right?
Right.
But I would involve the school and I would make sure though that my child was comfortable with me doing that because I would not want any negative ramifications back on my child. So that's going to determine how I do it. I mean, I'm still going to talk to the school, but that's going to determine sort of the approach I take.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic answer. This is actually what I was trying to get out earlier, is that when you do things like advocate for your child, which is going to the school and seeing what kind of programs they have in place, you in turn make the school better for everybody, for bullies, for people who are seeking understanding. Like being active and being a support for your child through their gender exploration will just, in general, help everybody around them to become more understanding. So thank you, Paula, for helping us with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to wrap up, messages about gender and sexuality are a huge, ginormous, gigantic part of our society. Young people need support developing their identities and combating negative messages. And as adults, it's important that we create safe spaces for you. So this includes supporting and advocating on their behalf. We can't say enough how important that is for them.
And just as with the other sessions, we are going to leave you with some challenges. And then the first challenge is to ask the young people in your life, what kind of messages they're hearing about gender and sexuality. Really discuss that. And I know I talked about this a little bit earlier, but really being able to get into what are the positive messages you're hearing, what are the negative messages you're hearing, what are the roles that you feel like you're kind of being pushed into, and how can you identify these gender roles, and how can you reject them? How can we empower young people to reject these gender roles? And the next challenge is just a self-challenge, challenging yourself and even the people around you to avoid gendered language when it's unnecessary. There's many times when we don't know the gender of a person, we don't know the pronouns that they use. We needlessly gender people, and it's something that we can avoid doing easily by using neutral pronouns, by using they, them, by just using a person's name. It's just a much more respectful way of referring to someone, and it shows that you're not assuming anybody's identity. So we are in the QA portion of the workshop. A couple quick things before we get into any questions though. In the chat, we'll be putting in a survey. It is a very short survey. We really appreciate your feedback, just feedback on the workshop, feedback on the presenters. We're also putting in a link to the next session. And that next session again is the birth control session. If you want to use this QR code, if you have an iPhone, you can just open your camera and point it at it. And once it's in the frame, it'll go directly to the code. If you have an Android, you will need to have an app to be able to get into the QR code. But if not, feel free to put in the bit.ly or use the link in the chat. Do we have any questions, patients?
We actually do. We have a few.
All right.
So I'm just going to do them in order that they appear. But the first question is, what is the difference between queer and transgendered, and isn't queer an insult to them?
Oh, that's a really good question. So normally when we talk about terminology, we will have like a big umbrella that says queer, and under it are the terms for gender and sexuality, because queer is really an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different identities. It encompasses gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, transgender, gender fluid, bigendered, agendered, all of that falls under the queer umbrella. So it's kind of a, just like a bigger word to be able to cover all of that. Queer is one of those words where it's very generational. I would say that younger people use it in everyday language. I feel like I feel like I'm the mid-range. I feel like I'm in like the mid-range where there was a point where like above me, I would say older people often identify it as offensive because it was used for a very long time as a very offensive word. And in some places it of course still is, but it's one of those words that a lot of people have reclaimed and has become really empowering. Patience, what would you add to that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is it's kind of a new appropriation. You know, there are some words that we probably can both think of in our brain, or all of us, that have maybe traveled through that spectrum, where we were like, at one point, this was kind of a word, but within the community and used appropriately and used with respect, then no. But I mean, anytime you're using a word to mean something derogatory, then it instantly means something derogatory. But for the new generation, there's a lot of people who are very, very okay with the word queer. It's very embraced.
Yeah.
And then the second one, we have actually 3 right now. Please feel free to go ahead and put in questions in. We'll get to them if we have enough time. The second one is, does using they, them pronouns mean you identify as gender nonconforming? Or can it also be of someone who prefers gender neutral pronouns but identifies as a woman?
Both. there's no rules to that. So it can absolutely be someone who identifies as a woman and uses they, them. It could be someone who identifies as a man who uses they, them. It could be someone who just doesn't want to be a part of any gendered language at all. There's no rules around it. It's awesome.
Yeah. I use they, them, and I am not gender non-conforming. I do push very hard against gender, but I use it because it feels good to me. So, yeah. And then the last one for right now is going to be, so just curious. This one might be a little bit deeper. So just curious, from a historical educational definitional perspective, who created specific identity terminology and definitions like bi, cis, trans, inter, fluid, pan? Leaders in the LGBTQIA community or academics in gender studies?
That is an interesting question.
That's a good one. It was a thick one.
I love that question because I would say in the 20 years I've been talking about gender and sexuality and doing workshops and presentations, I don't think I've had anyone that said, where did these words come from? And I would guess that they just come about mostly when the words that you use were slang. So slang just comes about, just with the evolution of language. If we look at more technical terms like homosexual or heterosexual, those of course have more scientific, I guess they're more from scientific fields, but also based in Latin with homo meaning the same. And I would say that some of the words that we used are absolutely reclaimed, and we forgot we even reclaimed them. What would you add?
In my head, I thought Google really quick. But I actually don't think that I know the answers to this other than colloquialism and things just being passed down and suddenly they just begin to kind of stick. I especially feel that way with gender nonconforming. I feel like being in the community, I almost felt like it was a small tidal wave that I was watching come towards me. Like I watched the kind of evolution of the current terminology, And
even that phrasing has really changed in the past 10 years. I would say 10, 20 years ago, if you were talking about gender nonconforming, you were talking about someone's appearance. You're saying a woman who is presenting as masculine, or just really simple things like a woman who is wearing a baseball cap, or a guy who's wearing a pink shirt or something. It was just very, very basic things. And I would say just in the past 10 years, it has really grown into more of an identity.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying how this generation is deciding to take words and make new ones and to completely turn everything inside out. So we have another one that just came in. And like I said, guys, go ahead and keep adding questions. We'll give you some time in case they're longer. So this one says, I have a young elementary aged kid and we've been talking about gender and sexuality with them for years, but I'm always looking for some good storybooks to read with them. Do you have any recommendations or resource sites to check out?
You know what? I don't think we included any elementary school resources. So we will send that out in the follow-up email. But some of the other resources that we've talked about in past sessions, like amaze.org, which really focuses on sexual health education, also talks about how to approach subjects of gender and sexuality. And they have the most amazing graphics. They're beautiful. They're like little cartoons. There's different videos. So I would really say to check that out. But we'll add some more resources that are for younger kids into the follow-up email.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I know a few books for small children, which is My Two Moms or My Mom and Me. But elementary age would give me a slight pause. But
yeah,
I will keep a lookout for those resources as well, and I will send you anything that I can find on it as well. So does anybody else want to ask anything else? I'm just like eagerly staring at the chat box.
I'm going to change the page so that also if you want to get more information from our website has a ton of information on it. Planned Parenthood, both Planned Parenthood of Illinois and the bigger Planned Parenthood website at plannedparenthood.org has a wealth of knowledge, and it's really great to be able to go through that information. It also goes through our services, and one of the services that we provide that a lot of people don't know about is gender affirming hormone therapy. So if you do have a young person in your life, or you do know someone who is thinking about beginning hormone therapy, we'll be happy to talk to them, to call and make an appointment. And in their first session, they will have an intake session where they talk about their goals, what they want in terms like physically from the hormones, emotionally, and just talking about things like what are our future plans for, do you want biological children? We can talk about how we can take steps to help that happen. But just being able to help someone live in a body that they feel comfortable in. And if you'd like to contact anybody directly, you can email us at ppileducation@ppil.org.
And then I'm just going to raise up one thing that somebody shared in the chat, and I did a little Google so that I can give you a little bit of information, but somebody recommended that the person who was looking for books check out or research somebody called Alex Gino, Gino. They're an American child book writer, and their debut book won the 2016 Stonewall Book Award. And they've also won some other, like Lambada Legal and other awards around the GLBT community. So Alex Gino seems like a great person for you to start referencing before we actually send you more material.
Yeah. All right. If anybody else has any questions, we will still stick around. Feel free to put it in the chat, but thank you so much. Remember to check out our next session, birth control, same time, same place next week, number 5 in our series of 7. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.